Hello friends, welcome aboard the Sleepy Fairy Tale Express. I'm the Red Mermaid. This train is a dream journey to fairy tale land. Have you all got your train tickets? Subscribe and hit the like button to always be able to ride. Close your eyes, prick up your ears, and listen in a comfortable position. Today's story is The Golden Bird. Once upon a time, in a far-off land, there lived a stately king who had a magnificent pleasure garden behind his splendid castle. This garden was admired by all who visited. At the center of the garden stood a mystical tree that bore shining golden apples each year. Every morning, the king would count his golden apples, cherishing them dearly. However, one morning, to his astonishment, he discovered that one of the apples was missing. Shocked by this discovery, the king ordered that guards be stationed under the tree every night. From that night onward, brave guards took turns standing under the tree, vigilantly and silently, under the starlit sky. The king had 3 sons, with the eldest bearing the weight of his father's great expectations. To protect the golden apples, the king sent his eldest son to the garden before nightfall. The eldest son took his task very seriously and positioned himself under the golden apple tree. As the night deepened, the garden grew quiet and peaceful. However, amidst the chilly night air and the stillness, the eldest son gradually succumbed to sleep. Despite his efforts to stay awake, sleep overcame him, and under the twinkling stars, he forgot his critical duty and fell into a deep slumber. The following morning, the king and the eldest son were deeply disappointed to find another golden apple missing. The eldest son had no idea what had happened while he slept, which was a great shock to both him and his father. Next, it was the turn of the second son to guard the night. Despite his older brother's failure, the king decided to give the second son the same opportunity. Determined not to repeat his brother's mistake, the second son took his place under the golden apple tree as the sun set. As the night grew deeper, the second son struggled to stay awake amid the quiet sounds of the garden and the cold night air. However, when the church bells struck midnight, his eyelids grew heavy, and he too fell victim to the lure of sleep. During the tolling of the bells, he drifted into a deep sleep. With the wind whispering through the trees, the night quietly passed by. But the next morning, the king and the second son discovered yet another golden apple missing. Now the second son, like his brother before him, faced the disappointment of failing his mission. This deepened the king's worries and made him wonder what would happen with his third son. Finally, it was the turn of the youngest son. Although the king did not have much faith in him, the youngest son was determined to prove that he could do better than his brothers. Unlike the previous nights, he came fully prepared and took his position under the tree. The youngest son was resolute. Lying comfortably under the tree, he gazed up at the star-filled sky and took deep breaths. The crisp night air brushed against his face, and although he felt the onset of sleep, he forcefully kept it at bay. He remained wide-eyed throughout the night, vigilant in protecting the golden apples. The night deepened, and the youngest son intensified his vigilance with each passing hour. Occasionally, he would stand and walk around the tree, keeping a watchful eye on his surroundings. His mind was filled with alertness and focus, and he vowed not to fall asleep. As the clock struck midnight and the air filled with a faint rustling sound, the youngest prince felt a subtle disturbance. It was like the wind brushing against the leaves, but carried a different energy. He concentrated, trying to locate the source of the sound. In the gentle moonlight, the youngest prince spotted a beautiful bird approaching the tree. The bird's feathers shone like gold, its brilliance unmistakable even in the darkness of the night. The bird gracefully landed on the tree and quickly turned its attention to one of the golden apples, beginning to peck at it. The youngest prince acted swiftly. He grabbed his bow and aimed a precise shot at the bird. The arrow sliced through the air, and although the bird managed to escape, it was hit by the arrow, losing one of its golden feathers. The feather fell twinkling to the ground. The youngest prince immediately picked up the golden feather and carefully preserved it. The next morning, he presented it to the king, who was deeply moved by his son's report. As the youngest prince recounted the events of the previous night, the king was profoundly impressed. He summoned all his advisors and discussed the golden feather brought by the youngest prince. The advisors examined the feather closely and debated its value. Unanimously, the advisors declared the golden feather to be of unimaginable worth. They assessed that it was not just a mere ornament, but had a value that could rival the wealth of the entire kingdom. Hearing this, the king was astonished and felt a great desire. If this feather is so valuable, then one is not enough. I must have the beautiful bird in its entirety. The eldest son then began his adventure to find the golden bird. Filled with confidence in his wisdom and bravery, he believed it would not take long to locate the golden bird. As he walked through the forest, aiming towards his goal, he encountered a fox. The fox looked very cunning, and at that moment, the eldest son thought of it as prey and pulled out his gun. However, the fox began to speak. "Do not shoot me. I can offer you advice that might help. You are looking for the golden bird, aren't you? Tonight, you will reach a village with two inns facing each other. One will be brightly lit and bustling with people and merriment, but avoid it. Go to the other inn, which may appear shabby. The eldest son thought over the fox's advice, but decided to shoot at the fox anyway. However, his shot missed, and the fox quickly disappeared into the woods. Dismissing and mocking the fox's advice, the eldest son continued on his path. By evening, he finally arrived at the village the fox had mentioned. Indeed, there were two inns facing each other. One was lively with songs and laughter pouring out, while the other looked quiet and dim. After a moment's hesitation, the eldest son chose to enter the lively, bright inn. Ignoring the fox's advice, he stepped into the merriment-filled inn. There, he indulged in delicious food, sweet drinks, and joyful music and dance. As time passed, he completely forgot his mission to find the golden bird and lost himself in the pleasures of the moment. The eldest son stayed at that inn the following day, and then another, continually enjoying himself and forgetting all about the golden bird, his father's command, and even all good teachings. His adventure stalled amidst the fun, and the mission to find the golden bird faded further away. As time passed and the eldest son did not return, the second son set out to find the golden bird. Carrying his father's hopes, he began his adventure, determined to find the golden bird and bring his brother back home as well. Similarly, the second son met a fox along the way. The fox offered wise advice to the second son as well, but he showed little interest. Despite hearing the advice, he ignored it and continued on his journey. Eventually, the second son reached the village with the famous two inns. He approached the first inn where he presumed his brother might have stayed. Bright lights and joyful music still emanated from it. The second son stood at the window and called out his brother's name loudly. The eldest son heard him and came to the window. Seeing his brother, the second son could not resist the temptation and entered the inn to join the festivities. Together, the brothers sang and danced, spending their time in enjoyment. Thus, both brothers became lost in a forgotten place, engulfed in endless pleasure, far removed from their father, the king, and the golden bird. As more time passed and neither brother returned, it was finally the youngest prince's turn. Although he wanted to join the adventure to find the golden bird, the king initially hesitated to send him. The king thought the youngest was even less capable than his brothers, lacking experience and possibly not knowing how to handle any problems that might arise. It's useless. The youngest will perform even worse than his brothers. If any trouble arises, he wouldn't know what to do. He's the least capable, after all. The king worried as he pondered this thought. However, the youngest prince did not give up. He continued to persuade his father, and eventually, the king, worn down by his persistence, decided to allow him the chance to go on an adventure. The youngest prince cherished this opportunity and vowed to walk a different path than his brothers. As soon as the youngest prince began his adventure, waiting for him at the edge of the forest was none other than a fox. It was the same fox that had offered advice to his brothers. When the youngest prince reached the edge of the forest, the fox stopped him and approached. The fox pleaded with the youngest prince to spare its life, offering in exchange to provide him with beneficial advice. The fox looked directly into the youngest prince's eyes, and its voice was filled with sincerity. The youngest prince was kind-hearted and compassionate. When the fox begged for its life, the youngest reassured it. "Don't worry, little fox. I won't harm you." Touched by the youngest prince's kindness, the fox decided to offer its help. "You won't regret sparing my life. Climb onto my tail, and I'll get you there faster," said the fox. When the youngest prince mounted the fox's tail, the fox started to run immediately. They dashed, dodging stones and tree stumps, with the wind whistling around them as swiftly as a flute. Their speed was dazzling, and the youngest prince enjoyed the ride. Eventually, they reached the village, and the fox let the youngest down. Following the fox's advice, the youngest prince headed straight for the shabbier of the two inns in the village. He entered without distraction, spent a comfortable night there, and rested well for the next day's adventure. The next morning, as the youngest prince left the inn and reached the fields, the fox was already waiting there to give him important advice. "I came to tell you what you should do next. Just keep going straight. You'll reach a castle. In front of it, a group of soldiers will be lying around. But don't even look at them. Just keep going. The soldiers will be snoring away. Walk straight through them into the castle. After passing through all the rooms, you'll finally reach a small room where a wooden cage with the golden bird hangs. Next to it will be an empty cage made of gold. But don't take the bird out of the shabby cage and put it into the fancy one. Doing so will bring you no good, so be careful." Hearing the fox's advice, the youngest prince once again sat on its long tail. The fox started to run fast, dodging stones and tree stumps as they cut through the wind toward the castle. The wind blew so fiercely that the youngest prince's hair fluttered as if whistling. When they reached the castle, everything was as the fox had foretold. In front of the castle lay a bunch of snoring soldiers, and the youngest prince carefully entered the castle, avoiding the soldiers. He hurried past them and through several rooms until he finally reached the room where the golden bird hung in a wooden cage. Inside the room, the golden bird shone, chirping within the wooden cage. Beside it, an empty golden cage glittered attractively. Additionally, 3 golden apples lay rolling on the floor, enhancing their beauty. The youngest prince looked at the golden bird trapped in the humble wooden cage and felt that such a beautiful bird deserved to shine in a more splendid setting. Led by this thought, he eventually forgot the fox's warning and took the bird out of the wooden cage and placed it into the golden cage. At that moment, the golden bird began to scream piercingly, and the sound immediately woke up the soldiers. Awakened by the noise, the soldiers rushed into the interior of the castle, and the youngest prince was captured and thrown into prison. The next day, he stood trial, confessed all his actions, and was ultimately sentenced to death. However, a glimmer of hope shone on his fate. The king offered him one condition: if the youngest prince could bring a golden horse that ran faster than the wind, his life would be spared. Moreover, he promised to gift the golden bird as well if he succeeded. Filled with sorrow and fear, the youngest prince set out again to fulfill the king's condition. He had no idea where or how to find the golden horse and sighed deeply as he moved forward. "Where can I find a golden horse?" he wondered despairingly. But hope found its way back to him. The fox suddenly appeared before him, sitting on the road, waiting for the youngest prince. The fox approached the youngest prince and gave him a lesson. "See, this happened because you didn't listen to me. But don't worry. I'll take care of you." The youngest prince listened attentively, ready to follow the fox's instructions. The fox continued to explain. "I'll tell you how to get to where the golden horse is. Just keep going straight. You'll reach a stable where the golden horse is kept. In front of the stable, there will be caretakers lying down. But they'll be snoring away, so you can lead the golden horse out without any problems." The fox hadn't finished speaking yet. "But remember, you must put a plain wooden and leather saddle on it, not the golden one next to it. If you don't, you'll encounter difficulties." This time, the youngest prince decided not to ignore the fox's advice and acted carefully. Once again seated on the fox's tail, the youngest prince, with the fox speeding ahead, dodged stones and tree stumps. The wind enveloped them, and the youngest prince's hair flew as if it were whistling. Finally, as the fox had described, they arrived at the stable where the golden horse stood. The youngest prince carefully entered the stable and found the golden horse, which shone brilliantly, captivating his eyes. However, recalling the fox's advice, he had to put the plain wooden and leather saddle on the horse. The youngest hesitated for a moment. The combination of the golden horse and the shabby saddle seemed mismatched. A golden saddle lay beside it, perfectly complementing the horse's magnificent appearance. After a moment of hesitation, the youngest prince lifted the golden saddle and placed it on the horse. He thought the splendid creature deserved a saddle befitting its status. Putting such a shabby saddle on this magnificent beast doesn't make sense. This creature deserves a fitting saddle, he convinced himself of his decision. But the moment the golden saddle touched the horse, it seemed uncomfortable and began to neigh loudly. This noise immediately awakened the stable caretakers, who discovered the youngest prince's actions. The youngest prince tried to calm the golden horse, but it was too late. The stable staff captured him and threw him back into jail. The next morning, the youngest prince stood in court. His face reflected the tension and anxiety from his previous adventures. The atmosphere in the courtroom was grave, and the judge sentenced the youngest prince to death. The air in the courtroom was heavy, and the youngest prince's heart thumped with the weight of his predicament. However, the king decided to offer him a new opportunity. Considering his courage and past achievements, the king promised a pardon under a special condition. The king solemnly told the youngest prince, "Your life is over. But if you can flatten the mountain in front of this window, you will receive mercy. I can't see beyond it because of this mountain. If you accomplish this task within 8 days, I will give you my daughter as well." With a heavy heart, the youngest prince set out to fulfill this new task. The mission to flatten the mountain loomed as a tremendous burden, but it was a vital opportunity that he couldn't forsake. His steps were heavy, and his thoughts were complexly intertwined. During this time, the youngest prince fatefully met the loyal fox once again. The fox was waiting by the roadside for the youngest. With a heavy heart, the youngest prince set out to fulfill this new task. The mission to flatten the mountain loomed as a tremendous burden, but it was a vital opportunity that he couldn't forsake. His steps were heavy, and his thoughts were complexly intertwined. During this time, the youngest prince fatefully met the loyal fox once again. The fox was waiting by the ROA. The fox's words plunged the youngest prince into deep contemplation. This latest directive was more complex and challenging than the previous aids. The fox knew the youngest prince was in an unfortunate situation, but couldn't completely abandon him. "I should leave you to your fate, but since I pity you, I'll help you one more time." The fox spoke to the youngest prince, teaching him the way to the Golden Castle. "This road will lead you to the Golden Castle by evening." The fox continued with instructions. "When everyone is asleep at night, the princess will go to bathe. When she enters the bathhouse, pounce and kiss her. She will then follow you. Just bring the princess back." However, the fox also added a word of caution. "But if the princess wants to say a final goodbye to her parents, you must not allow it. If you do, your situation will become perilous." This advice reminded the youngest prince of the lessons learned from previous tasks. Side for the youngest. Powered by the fox's swift running, the youngest prince arrived at the Golden Castle. The grandeur of the castle shone under the moonlight, and the youngest prepared to act according to the fox's instructions. He hid in the shadows of the castle, waiting for midnight. At last, it was midnight, and the castle interior was silent and still. As everyone slept deeply, the beautiful princess made her way to the bathhouse. The youngest prince, with his heart pounding, quietly followed her. As the princess entered the bathhouse, the youngest prince held his breath and waited silently. Once the princess was inside, the youngest prince approached her nervously and acted as the fox had instructed. He pounced and kissed her. The princess agreed to leave the golden castle with the youngest prince, but begged to say a final goodbye to her parents before leaving. She pleaded with tears in her eyes, seeking his consent. Initially, the youngest resisted, recalling the fox's warning, but as the princess wept more sorrowfully and knelt begging, he decided to grant her wish. This decision led to catastrophic consequences. As soon as the princess entered her parents' room, her tears and pleading woke everyone inside the castle, and activity quickly resumed. The princess's parents were shocked to learn of her intent to leave and immediately tightened the castle's security. The youngest prince was captured on the spot and once again thrown into prison. The youngest prince spent the night in jail, reflecting on his unfortunate fate. However, the next morning, the king visited the prison and made him an unexpected offer. This offer provided the youngest prince with another glimmer of hope, but also presented a tremendous challenge. The king spoke solemnly to the youngest prince, "Your life is now at its end. But if you flatten the mountain in front of this window, you will gain mercy. This mountain blocks my view of what lies beyond. If you manage this within 8 days, I will give you my daughter." The youngest prince devoted himself to the task of flattening the mountain, tirelessly digging and shoveling without rest. However, after 7 days, the mountain still stood unchanged, and his efforts seemed to have made no impact. Losing all hope, the youngest prince dragged his exhausted body, steeped in sorrow, believing he had failed. But that evening, as always, the fox appeared and offered a saving hand to the youngest prince. Seeing his desperate state, the fox expressed regret and said, "I've taken care of you all for nothing. Go on and get some sleep. I'll do this for you." As dawn broke, the youngest prince nervously approached the window and looked out. The scene before him was unbelievably transformative. The mountain had completely vanished thanks to the fox's magical abilities. The youngest prince experienced a mix of awe and joy, realizing this was reality, and tears of emotion flowed. Elated, the youngest prince rushed to the king to show him the view beyond the window, proving that he had successfully met the condition set. The king, upon receiving the youngest prince's report and seeing the disappeared mountain with his own eyes, was astounded. Having made a promise, the king was obligated to keep his word and had to give his daughter to the youngest. Thus, they both set off together. Not long after, the faithful fox approached the youngest prince and the princess. Seeing the couple together, the fox thought they deserved to have the golden horse as well. The fox advised the youngest prince, "You've got the best already, but a princess from the golden castle deserves a golden horse too." The youngest prince asked the fox, "How can I obtain the golden horse?" The fox continued explaining, "First, take the princess to the king who sent you to the golden castle. He will be so pleased with your actions that he will gift you the golden horse. Once the horse is yours, don't hesitate to mount it. Say your goodbyes and shake hands with everyone, and lastly, reach out to the princess. Pull her up onto the horse with you and quickly flee. No one can follow a golden horse, it's faster than the wind." The youngest prince and the princess followed the fox's advice and headed to the golden castle. They met the king of the golden castle, who gifted them the golden horse as a present. The youngest prince acted according to the fox's plan, and they swiftly left the castle on the golden horse. Thanks to the astonishing speed of the golden horse, no one could catch up with them. Everything proceeded according to the fox's plan, and the youngest prince, with the princess on the golden horse, sped away. The fox continued to offer advice, now helping them achieve their next goal, obtaining the golden bird. The fox said, "Now I'll help you get the golden bird. When you get close to the castle where the golden bird lives, have the princess dismount. I'll keep her safe. You go on the golden horse to the castle courtyard." This plan was designed for the youngest prince to personally obtain the golden bird. The youngest prince followed the fox's instructions. When they arrived at the castle where the golden bird resided, he let the princess down safely, and the fox began to protect her. Afterward, the youngest prince rode the golden horse directly into the castle courtyard. As the youngest prince entered on the golden horse, the people of the castle celebrated his grand entrance and handed him the golden bird. He grabbed the cage and immediately turned the horse around and dashed away. The youngest prince quickly returned to where the fox and the princess were waiting. After successfully obtaining the golden bird, the youngest prince and the fox continued their journey, reaching near a forest. At that moment, the fox made a heavy request. The fox said, "Now you need to repay me for my help." The youngest prince looked at the fox in surprise and asked, "What would you like me to do?" The fox's answer was unexpected. "When we reach that forest, shoot me with your gun and kill me. Then cut off my head and feet." This request deeply shocked the youngest prince, who could not understand why the fox would ask for such an extreme act. The youngest prince was stunned by the fox's request. He felt a profound ethical dilemma and responded to the fox. "Is that how you want to be repaid? I could never do such a thing." The fox seemed to understand the youngest prince's decision. However, this made the fox realize it could no longer accompany the youngest prince. The fox said, "Then I must leave you. But before I go, one more piece of advice. Be careful of two things: don't buy meat hung on a gallows, and don't sit at the edge of a well." With those words, the fox disappeared into the forest. The youngest prince pondered the fox's last advice, thinking how strange and bizarre it was. What a weird creature to harbor such bizarre delusions. Who buys meat from a gallows? And I've never even dreamed of sitting at the edge of a well. While he thought this, the youngest prince continued riding the golden horse with the princess. Their journey led them back to the village where his brothers were staying. Upon arrival, the streets were bustling and noisy. Curious, the youngest asked a passerby what was happening. The people responded that two men were about to be executed. As he approached, he discovered that the two men were his brothers, already facing execution. The brothers looked much different from before, seemingly having squandered everything through their misdeeds. The youngest's heart ached at their plight, and he sought a way to help them. The youngest approached the official to inquire if he could free his brothers. The official replied that it was possible for a fee, but given their bad behavior, he questioned whether it was worth spending the money. "If you pay, yes. But would you spend money on such bad men?" The youngest decided without further thought. He felt he must help them simply because they were his brothers. Thus, he paid the necessary money without hesitation. The forest scenery was cool and peaceful, providing much-needed rest after their long journey. Since the sun was blazing hot, the two brothers suggested they stop by a well to eat and drink. The youngest agreed, and they headed to the well. Shortly after, the youngest, not recalling the fox's warning, comfortably sat at the edge of the well. The fox's parting words, "Don't buy meat from a gallows, and don't sit at the edge of a well," faded from his memory. They drank cool water from the well and shared stories for a while. However, in this relaxed atmosphere, the youngest unknowingly ignored the fox's crucial warning, unaware of any sinister intentions at that moment. The two brothers then pushed the youngest into the well and quickly stole the princess, the golden horse, and the golden bird, heading back to their home. They believed they had successfully executed their plan and proudly reported their achievements to their father upon arrival. "We brought not just the golden bird, father. We also brought the golden horse and the princess from the golden castle." The two brothers expected their father's praise and rewards for their actions. The father was pleased, But the horse would not eat, the bird would not sing, and the princess just sat and cried. However, the youngest did not die. Fortunately, the well he fell into was dry. Soft, moist moss covered the bottom of the well, which cushioned his fall, absorbing the impact. Thanks to this, the youngest was not hurt at all and safely landed on the soft moss inside the well. However, the well was deep, and he couldn't get out on his own. Even in this dire moment, his faithful friend, the fox, had not forgotten him. With a firm resolve not to leave the youngest alone in any difficulty, the fox raced through the forest to his side. Approaching the youngest, the fox scolded him slightly. "I can't leave you like this. I'll help you get out of the well." The fox told the youngest to grab onto its tail. Once the youngest held on tightly, the fox pulled with all its strength, lifting him out of the well. You are not yet safe from all dangers. Your brothers think you are dead and have placed guards throughout the forest. If they see you, they will kill you on sight. Hearing this, the youngest cautiously walked along the road. Then, he saw a man dressed in tattered clothes sitting by the roadside. The man's clothes were faded and torn in places. The youngest paused and thought, "If I exchange clothes with this man, they won't recognize me." He approached the man carefully. The youngest offered his clothes to the man, saying, "These clothes will be helpful to you. They are made of fine fabric and are warm." Hearing this, the man willingly exchanged his worn-out clothes with the youngest. Now dressed as an ordinary person, the youngest concealed his identity and cautiously made his way to the king's court. As the youngest quietly stepped into the court, everything in the court began to liven up as if his arrival had been eagerly awaited. The bird that had been silent for a long time began to sing joyfully again. In one corner of the garden, a horse that had been refusing to eat started to feed again, and all these changes seemed almost miraculous. But the most astonishing change of all was that the princess, who had been steeped in sorrow, stopped her tears and her face brightened with a happy smile. Her sudden shift from sadness to joy made everyone in the court curious. Seeing these changes, the king could no longer hold back and exclaimed, "What is happening here?" The princess answered with a voice full of joy, "I don't know. I was so sad, and now I feel so joyful. It's as if my real bridegroom has returned." The two brothers had threatened the princess, saying they would kill her if she spoke up, but she bravely told the king everything that had happened to her. The king was shocked by her story and summoned everyone in the court to gather. At that moment, the youngest also appeared. He came disguised as a poor man in rags, but the princess recognized him immediately and ran to him with tears of joy, embracing him. The reaction of the princess surprised everyone, and the atmosphere in the court was charged with tension. As the evil deeds of the two brothers were revealed, the king immediately arrested them and sentenced them to death. And because of his true heart and bravery, the youngest was married to the princess and became the heir to the throne. The wedding of the youngest and the princess was celebrated lavishly in the court, and their love story spread throughout the kingdom. Everyone in the kingdom praised the youngest's honesty and courage, and they celebrated their happiness. The youngest and the princess became the protagonists of a new story of love and justice prevailing. As king and queen, the youngest and the princess made the kingdom a place of justice and overflowing love. But one day, the youngest went for a walk in the forest. The cool autumn breeze whispered through the leaves, soothing his mind in the peaceful woods. There, he unexpectedly met his old friend, the fox, who had helped him greatly in the past. Upon seeing the youngest, the fox said, "You have everything you ever wanted. But my misfortune has not yet ended. You are the only one who has the power to set me free." Hearing this, the youngest was surprised and saddened. The fox asked for one last favor to break its curse. The fox begged the youngest to kill it by cutting off its head and feet. This request shocked the youngest, but it was the only way to restore the fox's true form. Finally, the youngest decided to act as the fox requested. He took a deep breath and carefully cut off the fox's head and feet. At that moment, a miraculous event occurred. A bright light burst from the fox's body, and in an instant, the fox transformed into a human figure. It was none other than the princess's brother. He had been under a spell for a long time, forced to live as a fox. As the princess's brother was freed from the spell, he deeply thanked the youngest. With his gratitude, the family was joyfully reunited at that moment. This news spread throughout the kingdom, and everyone shared in their happiness. Thus, all problems were resolved, and the three lived happily ever after. The youngest and the princess, now not a fox, but the princess's brother, grew to understand and love each other more deeply. The entire kingdom also witnessed their love and unity, ushering in an era of peace and joy. Their story was long recounted among the people of the kingdom, teaching everyone the importance of courage, kindness, and the value of family love. you.